Hi, my name is Hannah, and today we're interviewing James. Originally from the UK, James ran a private wealth firm with offices in a few countries. Today, he talks about his background and then he gives us his view on the impact of the pandemic.
This podcast channel is about you, successful international entrepreneurs, successful expats, successful investors. Sponsored by HCJ.tax.
All right. James, thank you very much for your time, James. Appreciate it. I know you're a busy guy, especially this time of the year. So please, could you introduce yourself to anyone who may be watching?
Okay, so look, I'm the managing director and the founder of the Astra Group, and we have offices in Prague in the Czech Republic and also in Asia in Manila. We've been in business for a long time. So, and I've been in business, and my partners have also been in business in the Astra Group for many, many decades. We have a lot of experience in dealing with international people around the world. So, my colleagues and I have worked in places like the United Arab Emirates and a lot of the Gulf countries. And then as the Gulf slowed down, we then moved to Europe, where obviously many of our clients have moved back to or retired to. So we set up an office in Europe so we could address their needs and become properly regulated there. And then I think, as many of us are aware, perhaps some of the most attractive markets in the world at the moment, Asia and what's happening in Asia. So about 5 years ago, we also opened a regulated presence in Asia here. And, in terms of, making sure that we have the right platform to do business, I think what's really important is, actually, Derren, what you do is really good. So basically becoming comfortable with people in the market by doing seminars, by organizing events where people turn up and can actually meet you face to face and listen to what you say. I mean, I'm sure when you go into new markets, you have the same issues that I would have, or other businesses similar, that to start with, probably it takes time to get traction, which another word for that is basically trust. And then once you've got trust and people can see, what you do and that your service is genuine, then it's not that difficult to grow your business. But I think, some of the key things, which I'm sure you'll be familiar with, is that, you have to provide, people are now, if you're looking to target high net worth individuals, they're looking for a standard of excellence that many businesses can't provide. So, we would like to think that we would provide a better and more personalized service than a private banking group. And we would also feel that because we are international, we can actually provide more holistic for expats all around the world than, again, them going to see a lawyer or a notary or someone who's a private wealth manager. So these are the things which have basically helped us to build our business. And then, as we move into this sort of virtual world and you build your client base and you have your clients, then, the next step is to work on those clients that you have and generate referrals from them, and also use the sort of the status that your business gets by also getting contacts through social media and other channels. And I think, the easier ways to support you doing this is to make sure that through your platforms like LinkedIn or whatever you use, people can see that you actually care for not only them, but you're the kind of person that they would put their trust in as a business. So in terms of our business, even though the regulation in places like, the Philippines and some of the Gulf markets, and even in some areas of Europe, is a little bit light compared to sort of countries like maybe the UK or Singapore, we go above and beyond the requirements that are required, for us in terms of regulation. So, for instance, in Europe, we were one of the first companies that joined FIFA, which is the Federation of European Independent Financial Advisors. And this body was basically set up to give clients or investors in Europe confidence that the person that they were dealing with was suitably qualified, had the right insurance in place, and was properly regulated. So FIFA has now been going for over 10 years. It organizes, 2 conferences a year in Europe, and it makes sure that people who are working under the FIFA umbrella in Europe do the necessary CPD or continuing professional development to make sure that when they go out and speak to clients, that what the information that they have is relevant and up to date. So I think these things are very important. And part of what I've done in Asia is, as a company, we're members of the CISI, which is the Chartered Institute for Securities and Investments. It's one of the largest global bodies in the world in promoting financial education around the world. So it has offices, its head offices in the UK, but it literally has offices in places like the UAE, India, Singapore, and even the Philippines. So I was appointed onto the National Advisory Council of the CISI in the Philippines, and our goal is basically to promote financial services in the Philippines and in Asia, and to raise the standards in those markets so that the end customer gets a better deal. So for me, these things are really important, because if our prospective clients who check us out on LinkedIn can see all of these things that we do as a business and as individuals, I believe that this will give us an edge in the market. And this is something that we've been probably working on now for the last 5 to 10 years. And I would say we've probably ramped up this in the last 3 or 4 years, because it's a competitive market out there, and I think you need these extra, you need to have these extra sort of arms to or strings to your bow, as it were, to show customers that you really do care and that you're the right person to give them advice, whether it's a financial perspective, a tax perspective, or whatever it is that you're offering. So those are the things I believe that have set us up apart as a business. Mm-hmm. And then at the moment, obviously, as you're aware, we are in very difficult times, and I wouldn't say that anyone had the foresight to know what was going to happen now. But I think as many people have realized, and you also pointed this out, Derren, earlier, was that we are moving to a more digital world where, younger people are much more keen to deal online, and they don't necessarily want that human interaction. The other thing as well is that, as a business, if you're going to pass on good value to your clients, it's not necessary to have big offices now in expensive cities. In fact, I often feel that many clients think that, this just adds to the cost, and they feel that they're not going to get the value that they might out of a more boutique-y type company. So quite a few years ago, we gave most of our employees the opportunity to work online by setting up, things like Skype or Microsoft Teams, so that, not that we foresaw this happening, but, from our point of view now, although this pandemic is having a very negative impact on business and the stock markets around the world, on a day-to-day business, from a day-to-day business, from our side, it hasn't really affected us, because all our employees and advisors have been used to working from home anyhow, and provided that they have the information that they require to service their clients, and the clients can also access the information that they want through their smartphones or tablets, then I wouldn't say it's business as usual, but it's as usual as it could be. So technology has really played a part in helping us to prepare for what, this pandemic, which we definitely didn't see. And it's helped us to get ready for this, new world that we may see in the future, where less and less people are able to go into offices, or maybe only half of the staff are able to go into an office for a certain point of time, and then, they have to rotate, because, we may face a world where there are going to be more restrictions in the future on movement of people. but we are lucky that we live in a day and an age where the technology is already there, that for many big businesses, this doesn't necessarily affect them and their ability to still survive and to, generate profits and still provide a good service for their customers. So I don't know if that hopefully gives you a bit of an insight as to our background and how we've overcome some of the current problems.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that comprehensive overview. So I want to ask some questions following up from some of the points you just made. The first point you made earlier in your intro was that, your work experience has been pretty international, not just yourself, members of your team, and that among the jurisdictions you spend time in is the United Arab Emirates, Dubai. And you also mentioned that many of the clients were returning to Europe. And that kind of jumped out at me because that mirrors what myself and some other people in our ecosystem have seen. I've only been in Asia for 7 years, but one of the points that has come across pretty clearly to me is that the so-called age of Western expats is over. And the number of Western expats in terms of just absolute numbers, but also decision-making positions in various companies or whatever across Asia, and this is from China down to Indonesia, the numbers are on the decline. China, everyone knows what's been going on in China, their policies, but Hong Kong publishes their numbers, so the number of people who are on work permits, and the number of Western expats is down. Thailand, the internet is abuzz as what's going on in Thailand ever since the political situation there intensified. Malaysia, the American Association of Malaysia says that the number of families there have gone down by 50% over the past few years. So, as we go down to Indonesia, the streets that are empty, which the houses were formerly rented out by oil and gas guys that have now disappeared. So the number of Western expats have declined, but in some cases that they have been compensated for by the number of Asian expats, so people moving within Asia. And, you see that pretty clearly in the Philippines, where, in some condo buildings in Makati or BGC previously where you'd hear lots of British, American, or Aussie accents, now you hear people speaking Mandarin. So because the demographic is changing. So my question is, as a professional who targets Western expats, how do you deal with this shift where there's so many of us, because I count myself among them, chasing a shrinking pie?
Well, that's a great question, Derren. But fortunately for us, we have never only specialised in dealing with Western expats. So as a business, we are able to target expats of all nationalities. So, for instance, in fact, I think you've met him. In my team, I have a Russian guy who I believe you've met in Manila. And we also work with Chinese people who act as introducers to us to the Chinese Hong Kong market. And we also specialize, as I think in you do as well, in let's say the not so typical expat. So our market has never been like the Brit market where you get a Brit married to a Brit. It's been in the more unusual aspects of the market. So let's say a Brit married to a Malaysian or a Filipino, or a UAE national married to a Malaysian or a European. And as you know, these create complexities which your average private wealth banker or lawyer or whatever isn't able to deal with, because you're looking at multi-jurisdictional problems with regard to tax and inheritance. And fortunately for us as a business, we've been able to specialize in these areas because of the knowledge and the experience that we already have. So, I think probably for the last 5 or 6 years as a business, our percentage of, as you call them, Western clients has been dwindling already. And in many ways, we've done that deliberately because, again, I've been doing business for 25, 30 years. And I realize that if you depend on one particular type of person or product or whatever, You know, the code that I go by in life is that the only constant in life is change. So, you know, if you think that, you know, what you're doing today is going to be equally relevant in 10 years' time or even 5 years' time, the chances are you're lucky to have a job. And, you know, this is why we've diversified our business and targeted people of different backgrounds and nationalities, and made sure that we also have the product and the consultative abilities to be able to deal with these different types of people.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Of course,
I mean, I can give you an example if you want as to where people struggle. So, you know, I don't know whether you've been down to Labuan. You were mentioning, you know, obviously
I have,
certain places. Yeah. So if you go down to Labuan now, this used to be a booming offshore financial area, and was also a center for the oil and gas industry in Malaysia. So it probably had its boom day 10 or 15 years ago, and also it did very well at encouraging people to set up offshore companies there. And there were various tax benefits for certain people. But the oil and gas business, as you know, has basically been decimated over the last 10 years. And at the same time, Malaysia have changed the laws, probably because of FATCA and FATFA. So as an offshore jurisdiction, Labuan is very unattractive. So I've been speaking to one of the guys down there for the last 2 or 3 years saying, you know, you need to diversify your business, because if you keep just doing the same thing day in, day out, and this is what he's actually no business at all, because no matter how good you are as a person and how nice you are to talk to, you know, if your product doesn't really stack up, people won't buy it. And that's a good example of someone who keeps doing the same thing day in, day out for year after year after year, thinking he'll always have a business there. But, you know, as I say, the only constant in life is change. And as business leaders, we have to adapt to different environments.
Absolutely, well said. And speaking of environmental changes in the external environment, obviously the biggest challenge or change or factor, however you want to put it, that we're all facing right now is this pandemic. I mean, you've been in business for a long time. You've seen a lot of disruption. How do you think the present pandemic will affect businesses going forward?
You know, that's a very interesting question. And sometimes when we're in the middle of a pandemic, it can seem like an eternity. So, you know, this pandemic may last 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. And while we're in it, it's the only thing that anyone focuses on. So you turn on the news and all you hear about is the pandemic. You know, all you hear about is more deaths or the prime minister in hospital or whatever. And as human beings, it's very difficult for us not to get distracted by what's going on at the moment. But the reality is, as we all know, is that things like this have happened in the past.
Sure.
And we have all survived, and we have all gone on, and you know, the businesses have picked up quicker than actually a lot of people have anticipated. And at the end of the day, this is a medical issue. It's becoming a financial issue as well. But the reality is that this has not been caused by some massive financial catastrophe. Businesses have shut down now because governments around the world have instigated this. So while they're not just going to be able to turn the tap back on quickly, they have done this in a managed way, and the money that they're pumping into the economies around the world will hopefully mean that perhaps faster than we expect, you know, once things get back on tap again, you know, the economies of the world will pick up, and we will go back to some degree of normality, maybe towards the end of this year, and probably definitely by the end of next year. And as we, you know, as scientists and other people work on solutions to this pandemic in terms of vaccinations or whatever, you know, one of the amazing things is about humans is we have an incredible ability to adapt and to generate new solutions. There's a lot of intelligence and history out there, and I have no doubt that we will find a solution to this problem probably quicker than people anticipate. And I think, you know, for those of us who have been around a long time, and I think we're already beginning to see this. So when we had, you know, crises 20 or 30 years ago, which were unusual, was the end of the world. But in the last 2 decades, we've probably seen 2 or 3 significant events like this. And I think people have been surprised as to how quickly businesses and markets have recovered. And I think people are now beginning to bet on that happening again. So, as the greats like Warren Buffett have said, when there's blood on the street, perhaps that's the best. And at the moment, you're seeing sometimes markets going up by, huge amounts of 7 or 10% a day, when at the moment life feels pretty miserable if you're stuck in an apartment or a hotel room, and you can barely go outside for a walk. But I think the thing about it is, for us business leaders, we have to realize that tomorrow will come, and tomorrow will look a lot better than it does today. And we've got to focus to make sure that our businesses are in the best shape, so when that does happen, we're there, ready to take advantage and to continue to deliver basically what clients will want going forward.
Okay, but so I like that message. It's a positive message. It's very optimistic, especially when we're being inundated with not so positive news. And for some reason, the mainstream media seems to have adopted a particularly ominous tone in its reporting. But be that as it may, we will recover. I'm with you. But surely things will be different in a post-recovery world. So, for example, I imagine, as you were saying earlier, you guys have been doing work from home, remote working for forever. But I think many companies would suddenly see that as a worthwhile practice. Many companies may not like it, but they'll go with it because they've been forced to try it, and they saw the world didn't fall down and work still got done. You just need to communicate differently, manage your team differently, but it can happen. And there'll be an adoption of technology to support that. For example, we're talking on Zoom. As you mentioned earlier, Microsoft Team. We got our team. Our guys use Slack, so the software that will help facilitate that collaborative workflow. I would also imagine that data security, especially for those of us in financial services, would become a thing. If historically you're working in one office where client data would be on an on-site server, suddenly people are working remotely. They need to access stuff in the cloud that needs to be safe and secure. So that's another change. So I see changes. I see adaptation. But I also see that some industries may not, either they'll take a long time to recover, or they may not fully recover. Like for example, post 9/11, I am not sure that the travel industry ever returned to what it was pre 9/11. Again, travel is something I pay attention to because I used to work in the travel industry. So travel did recover, but it was the way the airline, the tour operator, the hoteliers, the way they were post 9/11 was radically different before. And right now we see a lot of airlines especially, are very capital intensive, very cash intensive. Unless you're backed up by a state like Singapore, they'll pump some cash into Singapore Airlines and presumably Scoot. Assume the Americans will do the same for their American carriers. Unless you have the backing of a state, you may be in trouble. I wouldn't be surprised if AirAsia is a casualty going forward. They already had problems before, and this may push them over the edge. Some of the other low-cost carriers who may have had difficulties. So certain industries, I don't know whether they'll be able to recover fully. And if they do, the way they look and the way they operate post-recovery will be way different from the way they were previous to this. What do you think about that?
Well, that's a great point, Derren. And unfortunately, again, in life, as you know, there are always winners and losers. So at the moment, I think we are getting, probably, as you've just identified, there are certain definite losers that we can see here. So, the travel industry and the tourism and the hotel industry is a definite loser in this market. But if we believe what you and I have talked about, that more and more people are actually going to work from home, will the losers also be things like REITs and companies that invest in office towers and buildings like that? And is that necessarily a bad thing? So I'll give you an example, of our company. So we have one lady who basically works for us in Manila because, as you know, everyone comes into Manila because the Wi-Fi is better there, and the services and everything like that are in the provinces are terrible. So luckily for her, she managed to escape to her hometown, which is somewhere out in the sticks in the north of the Philippines. And she took a dongle with her, and she's been able to work remotely. So I wouldn't say it's an ideal situation, because if I have a conversation like this with her, I can hear chickens in the background and kids and stuff like that. But these are minor problems. But I guess what I'm trying to hint at is that when we move forward after this pandemic, will governments and these kind of organizations have the vision to understand that they need to move people out of the cities anyhow? It's illogical that people should come from all these different islands and cramp Manila up and live in terrible conditions just to work in Manila, when you're demonstrated now that we can work online. So will governments invest money in infrastructure, so that, everyone in the world should have access to Wi-Fi? People talk about this, but, you and I know that that isn't the reality. So will this event stir people to actually do things which will improve the quality of people's lives, mean that cities aren't so busy and polluted, and mean that more people can work from home, but still deliver the kind of service that, the businesses that are going to survive in the future will need? I mean, obviously, we're always going to need cities, and certain people will always need to work out of offices. But, is it reasonable to assume that probably at least 30% of people who go into offices don't need to actually work there, and they could actually work in other areas? Would it be that difficult for the government to, highlight areas in the Philippines where there's a well-educated population, where they could put the infrastructure in place so call centers and other businesses could operate from these areas, and mean that people are closer to their families and children? From a human point of view, this is a chance to grasp, an opportunity and to make the lives of their people better. And yes, certain businesses will lose as a result of this, but other businesses will benefit. And this is life. And it just goes back to what we were talking about earlier, that as entrepreneurs, we need to understand, where the world is heading, and to make sure that our businesses are best placed, to survive whatever it is that is thrown at us in the future.
No, those are very powerful points. The point you made earlier about, if it is that the workflow becomes more decentralized, what impact would that have on REITs, or what impact would that have on real estate, commercial real estate in general? Because we know that serviced offices, co-working spaces, the most well-known example has been WeWork, but we have others here in Asia that have been doing a similar business model. How is their business model now going to be challenged if it is that people, as a result of getting the Wi-Fi, as a result of just being made comfortable working remotely, and commercial or company policies allowing it, what would that do to commercial real estate? What would that do to serviced offices? What would that do to, even by extension, residential? Do I really need to live in Makati? Do I really need to live in Manhattan? Do I really need to live in Zone 1 of Central London if I'm working in the city? So now that I'm allowed to work remotely, and then when you have a nation state, and I'm just playing this through now, when I have a nation state like Singapore, whose competitive advantage has been, yes, the soft assets that they have, like the rule of law, the international arbitration, but they also have these hard assets like Wi-Fi, safety, security. If it is that, for example, I'm able to work remotely and I can do so more cost effectively from Malaysia, do I really need to be in Singapore? Of course, if I have a Singaporean company, I need to have board meetings, I need to do certain things for tax and regulatory purposes. But most of my staff and my day-to-day working, I don't need to be in Singapore. And what does that do to the viability and attractiveness of your Singapore, your Hong Kongs? So I see, I'm glad that you're taking the topic in that direction, because that's an area I had not previously thought of. Obviously it's not going to happen next month, or maybe not even next year, but at some point these things could be real. That the whole shape of urban planning may be different. The role that cities play right now could evolve, and you get a rise in not these big Asian type megatropolis like your Tokyo's or Metro Manila, 23 million people, Jakarta, 30 million people. It could be secondary cities, secondary urban areas where there's smaller groupings of people, which allow potentially for a better quality of life. So yeah, very interesting points.
Well, and that's a positive, in my opinion. So as you say, if we start to break up some of these massive metropolises, like Manila and Jakarta, which are basically just slums for most people there, that can only really be a positive. And if we can get more people going back to where they actually came from and enjoying a better quality of life, maybe that'll be a good thing that comes out of this pandemic. And I'm sure that there will be again winners and losers in the airline industry, but the reality is that in 3 or 4 years, even if we lose a few airlines here and there, as a new dawn and new opportunities arise, there will be new entrepreneurs who will take up the slack and replace the ones that have gone. Because there'll be a demand there. It might be a new demand. The demand may be not as strong, but the demand will certainly be there if the world continues to generate wealth. People will still want to travel and go to nice destinations. And again, if more people not living in the cities and people set up businesses as they're beginning to do in the remoter parts of the Philippines, and they can do this in a way that attracts tourists to come, then that the airlines will obviously need to fulfill that need, as they have been doing really in the last 5 years to 10 years. And obviously what's really perhaps the most important thing about this is that the governments in the region stick to what they've been doing in the past 5 to 10 years. So the ability of people in the ASEAN region, as which is 600 million people, to fly from Vietnam to the Philippines, or Vietnam to Myanmar, or Vietnam to Laos, or whatever, without the need for a visa, has revolutionized businesses like Air Asia, because it means that a Filipino can easily go to Singapore without a visa, or to Laos, or to Vietnam, or a new destination that they set up somewhere within the ASEAN region. So again, hopefully governments will not look inwards and take away some of these things which have made the world, in my opinion, a better place to live in, and given more people the opportunity to travel and enjoy some of the things that are around them. And also by mixing, it helps people to also become more understanding of different cultures and values. And these things are very, very important. And this is like what the EU has also achieved by helping young people move and study from one country to another. And let's hope that as we move forward, that these freedoms are still there for the young, and for those of us who want to be able to travel without the burden of visas and lots of bureaucracy and stuff like that, which would be a real negative in my opinion.
Absolutely. So that's again another great point. So my thesis is that this pandemic, it's not going to be revolutionary in the sense that it creates something new. What it would do is either accelerate or exacerbate trends that were already in play. And as you mentioned the EU, as you mentioned ASEAN, one of the trends that existed pre-pandemic was economic nationalism. We'd come out of a period of fantastic globalization, and suddenly we were seeing a pivot. We saw Brexit, we saw President Trump, we saw Duterte being very nationalistic, basically Philippines first. I'm wondering whether the pandemic won't accelerate or exacerbate, depending on whether you judge it as being good or bad, this trend towards economic nationalism. Because when I'm looking at what's going on in the EU, I mean, strangely enough, Germany, the EU members, for the first time since the EU experiment really got off the ground, they were curtailing movement within the EU. The borders were being closed. And I'm wondering, okay, is this temporary, or is this a taste of things to come? What are your thoughts?
Well, you know, the countries that are in the EU are very, very passionate about the freedom of movement of people. You know, that's very clear. And any EU leader that you listen to, this has been one of the pillars of the EU. And for me, the EU has been one of the greatest projects that I've witnessed in my lifetime. It's created peace in Europe, and it's created a better cultural understanding, you know, so English people can go to Hungary or the Czech Republic and go and study there. And likewise, Spaniards can come and live in London or Germany. So, you know, for me, the EU has been a fantastic positive. You know, like everything in life, it's never always a straight road. And I wouldn't say the EU by any stretch of the imagination is perfect. But where it's not perfect is probably because the politicians have failed and they haven't grasped the bigger picture. So I'm not saying whether what they've done now is right in terms of closing borders. We live in a world that we've never experienced a moment in time like this in my lifetime and obviously in yours. So I think this decision has been based on purely medical reasons. And I have no doubt that once the coronavirus goes away, that the borders will be opened again. And again, this will be a great opportunity for Europe to sit down and think, what did we do right and what did we do wrong? And clearly, and this has happened in the past, as a nation, as the EU as a nation, they haven't acted collectively enough together. So they probably weren't there early enough to support the Italians. And, you know, they've all acted as independent countries trying to do their own thing. Whereas if the EU was truly, they would have acted more collectively and helped each other out to minimize these problems. And I'm sure in time, when they review this event, they will realize that and hopefully come to that conclusion and as a result be better for it. Because I don't think anyone can be any doubt that the EU has been a success. It's one of the most beautiful and most interesting continents in the world. And if you were to ask people of the world where they would want to live at this moment in time, it would probably be the EU. You know, they have history, they have freedom of movement, they have the ability to work and go to different countries, buy property. Where in the world can you do that? So the EU, even though for all its faults, is still a shining example to the rest of the world as to how most of us in the world would actually like to live. You know, as you've said yourself, unfortunately, if you just read the papers and look at the media, it's always very negative. But that's what media is. And it's up to us as, you know, entrepreneurs or people who have a different point of view to get it out there so people can actually see the positive side as well as the negative side that we're confronted with every day.
Wonderful, wonderful. And on that very positive note, I thank you for your time. It has been enlightening. And I have no doubt whatsoever that those who do look at this video through to the end would derive great value from it. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Derren. I appreciate you inviting me. So bye for now.
Okay.